Conversing is produced and distributed in partnership with Comment Magazine and Fuller Seminary. I'm Mark Labberton. Welcome to Conversing. Welcome to Conversing. Today's episode is a special opportunity for a conversation with several people who were active participants in a pretty extraordinary gathering recently at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. It was called the Understory Festival. It was a gathering of about 1,000 or more people who came together to spend a couple of days experiencing and seeing and feeling and thinking about the meaning of what it is to be human. There's a link in the notes that will tell you much more. I'd like now to just briefly introduce each of the participants in this conversation. First is Anne Snyder, who is the editor-in-chief of Comment, a magazine of public theology for the common good that is becoming a vibrant ecosystem of conversation and community. Next is Ray Pennings. Ray is the executive vice president and co-founder of Cardus, a leading Canadian think tank, and the publisher of Comment magazine. Elizabeth Oldfield, who has spent 5 years interviewing public figures about their deepest values on her podcast called The Sacred. Shadi Hamid. Shadi is a columnist and member of the editorial board of the Washington Post. He's also a research professor of Islamic studies at Fuller Theological Seminary, and together with Matthew Kamick, hosts a podcast called Zealots at the Gate. Each of the 5 people in this conversation are hosts of podcasts sponsored by Comment Magazine. We're so grateful for the partnership that we have together in this work. These people and I had a conversation together just after the festival ended in Washington, D.C., reflecting on the values and commitments and experiences of those 3 remarkable days and the deep underpinnings that's part of the vision behind Comment and the Comment Manifesto. Join us now for this rich conversation. We have had such a privileged experience over these last few days to be part of something in Washington, D.C. at the National Cathedral, which has been under the title The Understory Festival. 2 really, really wonderful and rich words. And part of this is really the charism that God, I think, gave you, Anne, and combined with the sponsoring organization, the full-on partner of Cardus, who supports and undergirds and is absolutely part of the Comment family. So I'd love it if you could just give us a sense of what the calling was for this festival, and then we're going to have a chance to talk a bit about what our experiences and our insights from this have been.
Thank you, Mark. There are like a million portals into the answer to this, so it's hard to pick just one, but I think at a basic level, I have long felt and experienced in our part of the world that there is so much hope that is bubbling up bottom up, often in local places, but also a fragrance of thinking and leadership that is somehow so diffuse and uncoordinated and hidden. And everyone has talked in this country, in the US, the last number of years, local hope, national despair. It's a very common thing. I felt that for a long time. And I think I just was starting to get very frustrated that it felt like the only cohering narratives and cohering currents were what I would view as quite disordered forces that were at the most basic level drawing out all of our reactivity and all of our not so great angels or our demons. And so I wondered, is there a way to cohere and make visible all this like hidden constellation of common good actors that are actually quite diverse within themselves, including very much across religion and not religion. But could we do so in a way that somehow rooted it in a plumb line that had some intellectual rigor and philosophical history, but that also had beauty. And So I'm referring right now to a gathering, the Understory Festival, but the Understory as a concept actually came from a conversation with Elizabeth. I'm realizing this right now. I don't know if you've been thinking about this whole time, or sorry, I hadn't acknowledged it, but I think it was a few years ago, and you mentioned this book. I can't remember what we were talking about, but Lori Wilbur, called The Understory. Said, "Have you read The Understory?" And I just immediately loved the word. So there was something about that was an initial spark. That the more I just sat with it, it came together with a sense of, I think this could be a name that doesn't have baggage, that is sufficiently enigmatic, that is from nature in a time when we're all very aware of what's happening to our planet, that somehow can evoke something that people resonate with, and they can't entirely explain why, but they have intrigue. So.
That's a great way of capturing it. I do think what captured me right from the start was this sense that it was an invitation to acknowledge what was already present, but which was hard to reach, hard to gather, as you said, hard to figure out how do you take the ineffable and the eternal and the granular and actually bring it together in a way that is verdant and productive and generative, reflective really of what's happening. I love the fact that that theme was not just a theme, but actually the reality of how the whole conference and gathering festival itself was put together. And it shaped, I think, a lot of people's imaginations. I kept wondering, why are so many people, there were about 1,000 people, why are 1,000 people gathering for this particular thing? And I do think it was partly one of the questions that you asked toward the beginning about whether what is it that's being birthed in this particular, wanting to be birthed in this era. But the other part of it was also, what is the thirst or hunger that is actually the thing that is drawing people into this space? And I'm just curious, as each of us through our own particular lenses think about that, what some of that understory of our own experience might be what we brought to this time. Ray, I'd like to give you an opportunity as the person who leads Cardus, and in such a significant time. Cardus's work in Canada and far beyond is really so significant, and I would say very much an expression, an embodiment of what this spirit has been about. So tell us a bit about your perspective on that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark. Cardus is a think tank in Canada, and to some extent we do the work that traditional think tanks do. We're a bunch of policy geeks who provide advice to governments and industry associations on political issues. But right from the very beginning, when my colleague Michael Van Pelt and I co-founded Cardus in 2000, we were very conscious that many think tanks and many policy prescriptions very quickly run out of gas.
Yes.
You start with a brilliant idea, you beat it to death for a couple of years, and then you become tired. And we were quite resolved in building a new think tank that was explicitly faith-based, because we felt there was something deep in the roots, just to go back to the understory. We thought there was something deep in the roots that wasn't being talked about. And we're in Canada, where talking about faith is a little more difficult than it is in US, although quite different in character as well. So one of the things that we did very early on is start a magazine. And the audience of the magazine was us. We created a magazine for ourselves. We're like, I appreciate all the kind words about us being generous and all the rest. We were pretty selfish, actually.
It's good to admit that.
But what we wanted to do is we needed to understand what's happening in the culture, and the magazine, the festival, everything. So I came here very much with a listening ear. What could I learn about what's going on? To what extent were all of these local activities authentic, unique? Was there something they could learn from each other? They need to be brought into conversation with each other. The other thing that I would highlight is, our own philosophy. Sort of we come out of the Dutch Reform neo-Calvinist sort of tradition, which places a strong emphasis on civil society. It's not identical to, but in American terms, it'd be very similar to a Tocquevillian perspective on things. So our own default assumption is not to look at politics as the lead. Politics is downstream from culture. So it really takes a read of the culture to understand what's going on. And that really, I came here very much with a listening ear, putting on my think tank as opposed to my common publisher hat. What is it that we need to learn about what's happening?
I think it's significant and suggestive of the things that both of you have shared, that it really was called a festival, because a conference is much more about just one part of the brain and organizing and producing and having outcomes and measurements and all of that.
It's a very broken learning form.
Whereas festival is much more a full wholeness of body, spirit, mind, heart, soul. It's a celebration, it's an experience, it's a reality. And part of it is the event that has now happened called the festival. But really the deeper meaning of Understory Festival is really that that's actually what's happening in real time and space in all kinds of manifestations, registered or not registered, public or private. And I'm just curious, Elizabeth, how you enter into this festival, and what is it that came together in various themes and soundings that have been meaningful?
Yes, and with great joy, and I would not have got on a plane to a conference. I think the thing that's really struck me is how, and it's in the principles of Comment Magazine, the honouring different ways of knowing.
Right.
And I used to run the Theos, which is a kind of part of a similar family of think tanks, faith-based think tanks in the UK. And Shadi works in DC and does a lot of policy work. Lots of us have been formed by this theory of change around if you just have the best ideas,
yes.
If you just have the strongest arguments, if you just have the best data and evidence, then the world will change. That's what we do. And it's not just a kind of people know from experience that doesn't actually work, but our deepening understanding of who we are as humans, our understanding of neurobiology is really beginning to challenge the primacy of those ways of knowing, not undermine them, not say we don't value them,
right?
But to broaden our sense of how humans how we remain reality rooted, right? How do we actually see? How do we actually understand? And then how do we actually build something beautiful? And it has to involve these imaginative, intuitive, creative, relational ways of knowing for us to be able to be fully human. I believe that's how we were created to be, right? It's part of the image of God in us. But I go to kind of broadly right hemisphere, I go to the theatre a lot, I go to concerts, I go to poetry readings, and then I go and see people give lectures and have debates, right? And to have had all of that in one space was such an interesting experience for me. To have them not like, well, this is the real thing that's happening, and around the edges is like the aesthetics of sprinkles to make the medicine go down, right? The way that beauty and art and embodiment, the feasting and the moving and the artist working in all the little cathedral nooks allowed the ideas, I think, to land in a different way. Allowed us to imagine more, to open to possibility again, to get out of those tram tracks of thinking that we get into when we've thought about things the same way for such a long time. And the kind of the beauty and the breadth of all of those things being in one place. Honestly, I have never felt more at home in a place, because like all of me is allowed here. Right.
I think that was the grandeur of the invitation, right? For a lot of people coming together felt like an enigmatic experience. I'm so excited and enthusiastic about being able to come, and I have no idea what I'm going to experience. I think few of us have gone to gatherings where that was as high a degree of value and experience. And I think we all came away understanding, why in a way you could not have laid it out in the way that a classic quote conference would have been, and that it was an invitation into something, into a lived experience, which is part of what the theme of the Understory is all about. Shadi, what was it for you? Elizabeth talked about various seedlings and affluences that struck her. I'm curious, how have you interacted with what happened these days?
Yeah, well, first of all, I really didn't know what to expect. I haven't really been to many Christian festivals or conferences. This is not my world. As I should say that I'm not Christian, just so people are aware of what I'm talking about. I'm Muslim. I co-host a comment podcast with an evangelical theologian called Zealots at the Gate, but I'm the kind of Muslim voice in that. So I came in as a participant, but also as an observer, kind of looking at things a little bit from the outside. I'll just say that, naturally as a Muslim, I don't agree with Christianity's truth claims, but that doesn't mean that I can't appreciate the beauty of Christianity. I think Christianity has so much to offer to society, and specifically American democracy at this moment. And what was wonderful for me is all my favorite Christians were here. So it was really a coming together of just a remarkable group of people, and that was really powerful to me to see that there are people who are looking forward, who are hopeful, who believe that America, Canada, other countries that we maybe have relationships with can actually become better, that it is not a dead end. I think so many of us, especially as Americans, there's just such a negativity bias in the media and in our own minds of just how we look at the world. So to be reminded of beauty, to be reminded of experiences with people we care about here at the festival. And I think there's a as other people have said, there is a real, I think, yearning and hunger for a different way of looking at the world. So many of us are struggling with this moment in American politics, and some of us are sad, depressed. People don't know what their path is.
Right.
There's a real sense of despair, and a sense that just things aren't quite right.
Right.
And to be reminded that things can be made right, or maybe not right, but more right than they were before, is really inspirational. And I want to be reminded of that. I need to be reminded of that. I think about politics a lot as part of my job, but to be reminded that change happens primarily or even mostly through culture and through religion and through spiritual practices, that we don't have to be obsessed every single day and every single moment with the political news of the day, that there is a kind of deeper story. And we have to go to religion, we have to go to faith, and we have to go to our spiritual practices in order to kind of change the country. Culture is the path.
Yes. Well, I do think the culture theme was very prominent, and part of the reason why I think the attendance and the eagerness of people who weren't able to come but who have been following it over the days has been really this invitation into the wide cultural space, rather than entering it through the lens only of faith, though that was central to the practices of what occurred. And yet it didn't require that as the first point of entry. And if faith and religion was your entry point, that was a completely appropriate thing. If it was also just culture, or culture primarily, then that was also a rich invitation, which creates a platform that's much bigger than kind of religiosity as the core, with no aspersions whatsoever per se about religion or institutional religion even, but just on the fact that those forms and structures do often create both pathways and hindrances.
Yeah.
And I think the openness of the invitation of Understory, and then the experience of the festival that leads you into, again, the reality of the Understory, which is really the human experience, the experience of being human with all of the granularity and particularity and earthiness of what our embodied lives are actually about. Yes.
If I can just jump in
Please.
on that and picking up on what you just said and what Elizabeth said earlier about winning arguments.
Yes.
I think, the reality is, as human beings, we are lovers more than we are thinkers.
Yes.
There is a sense in which, and I think that's a very Christian concept, loving God above all, and part of the pathologies that we face in the world are because of idolatries of loving the wrong things in the wrong way.
Right.
And I think one of the benefits of this sort of approach that was there was it invited the other parts of our brain, the other parts of our experience in terms of loves. I'm not particularly aesthetically gifted, and philosophically I'm very committed to the arts. That said, there was a good amount of art that was there and music that was there, in which I wondered more about what I was supposed to understand than actually experiencing the understanding at times. There were other pieces that were much more in the genres I was familiar with, and I suspect that was true for almost every guest. It was such a variety. This wasn't just one type of genre that neatly fit a model. This was quite a wide experience. And when I didn't understand it, part of it was, okay, what makes the person who understands and really appreciates, and usually they were sitting right around you, so I got to people watching and watch the other people respond. And, okay, I don't quite get what you're getting excited, but boy, you're getting excited. And that was a pretty good thing.
And that's what feels unusual, right? The way both our information environment and just when we do experience culture, we're so sorted, right? We're so sorted by these hyper-specific niche tastes that we're really only usually with people who like the same things as us. And so to be next to, like, I'm weeping at the thing the other person's rolling their eyes at, but we are still sharing an experience, and that those moments of embodied collective ritual where it can hold it, right? It can hold the different tastes, it can hold the different preferences without that becoming a kind of reason to move away from each other, right? It felt like the cathedral could, that there was a really big net, and in the bits that I wasn't vibing with, I was you're exactly right. I was watching the people loving it, and that is powerfully, profoundly, theologically rich somehow.
Right. Well, I do think that. Sorry.
No, I'm moved by that observation.
Yeah.
That's all.
Absolutely. I do think the spirit of theological understanding that we worship those who are Christians and people of other faiths, Abrahamic faiths, for example, worship a God who's capacious in being and mind and spirit and attitude and approach, and that allows for the eclecticism, or just the diversity, or the vibrant variety, as David Goatley, the president of Fuller, calls it, this incredible eclecticism to arise in a way that in some circumstances is really fenced out. Like, we do not want eclecticism. We are one brand with one type, with one voice, with one message, with one formula of it. And I think the attraction, in part, to this call to the deeper understory is a call to an acknowledgement of that richness of all of that variation and the tastings that will be, exactly as you said, Elizabeth, where some are rolling their eyes and some are breaking into tears because of the impact. I found myself very tearful a number of times throughout the gathering. And it was partly because it was triggered by the hope that had been behind the whole vision. It was partly triggered by beauty. It was partly triggered by people that were here and expressing their gifts in ways that are not frequent enough in my life. So I felt it was an invitation into a wider and deeper space. And that's just a very profound thing, and not an easily achieved thing. I think it was part of God's abundant blessing.
Do you mind if I'm
Please.
Don't want to be talking too much, but the word that's been coming to me this whole festival is "and."
Yes.
And I was thinking about it as Christian Wyman was reading poetry, but also elsewhere, the spaces that can hold beauty and brutality and look them both in the face.
Right.
Right? And the tragedy of the times, and the promise of the times, and the wounds and the wonder, and the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, and men and women, right? You know, left and right, like the binaries that we so fall into means that and is a very uncomfortable place to balance it. We really do think it's an either or situation. Right. And you know, the last night to have the beauty of the music, and then to be talking about the Holocaust, to be talking about Viktor Frankl, for it to be so dark and so heavy, and then so beautiful, the sense of the fullness of life, actually, the fullness of the human experience held in one place is what kept making me weep. The like relief of, we get to be honest about both.
Yes.
We don't have to deny one part of this.
Right. I've often thought of Romans chapter 8 as a chapter in Paul's writings which contains this image of groaning beauty. And that is exactly the same sort of theme. How does all of that groaning that's laid out in that Paul's argument in chapter 8 of Romans, how does all that get held together with this deep, profound hope that is never outside the love of God?
I've always, funny, I don't know, sometime in my early 20s, someone just asked me, what's your definition of beauty? And I always said it was groaning. I actually have never understood it as fulfillment, ever. And maybe that's also aesthetic taste. I always prefer a minor key to a major. Well, there are exceptions. It depends on the genre and the beat and everything, but color palettes, word and language and rhythm. So it's just I don't know if that's theological. I don't know what Dana Gioia would say about that, or you know, Mako. People who really think and embody beauty in their work as artists, but I just want to pick up on. I just wanted to note when you said groaning beauty. To me, that's redundant.
Is that part of the appeal, though, of the festival? I wonder whether or not, you know.
Which I mean is a good thing.
I come from the one of the major policy files we're dealing with at Cardus is Canada's adoption of euthanasia. We've gone from nothing to it being record and being front page, and all of the rest. And on the one hand, it's a policy question, lots of details, but underneath it is a refusal to accept the death and dying process is a beautiful thing. And I was sharing with someone here at the festival, the testimony of Ben Sass. Right now, in these days, from afar, I've admired his work in his life as in his various roles. But frankly, he is teaching us more about how to die well than he ever taught us in terms of how to live well along the way. And I'm wondering whether or not we are perhaps at a longing point, even in our culture and our society, in which we don't know how to deal with suffering. We've been told it's all about autonomy and accomplishment and fulfillment, as opposed to the beauty of groaning. My wife and I have lost all 4 parents. I've been around deathbeds, the most beautiful, sacred moments, but they were deathbeds. The Burundi woman, was 73 murders that she arranged for the funerals. The essence of that story was the beauty of a woman having brutality all around her and dead bodies, burying those bodies, giving dignity and giving rise to something that was sown in the midst of all of that.
One of the things that I think is so present in this event, which is really an invitation always beyond the event, it's not about the event as a dead end or a cul-de-sac of some kind, it's really a doorway into an acknowledgement of all of these things that may be present in our world and our personal lives and on the global stage and national stage, local stage. I'm just curious, how did that opportunity, that sort of capacious invitation, strike you, and where did you find yourself being maybe even surprisingly awakened or ready to receive an invitation to go further or deeper or in a direction that you wouldn't have come anticipating?
Well, maybe just to add to what Ray just mentioned, I think that there's a real sense that the secular way of approaching things has failed. We've been told that more secularism will lead to a rational, reasonable politics, that our lives will improve, that progress will happen. But I think that the broader society has reached a dead end where there's a real sense that that wasn't enough and we need a new paradigm to guide us. And I don't know if there'll be a religious awakening in the US, that might be overstated, but I do think there is a yearning for worshiping something beyond ourselves, for not being so me-centered and shifting to an other-centered approach to life. That, I think, is really what's bubbling up in the culture on both left and right. And I should also say a really cool thing about the festival is that it was political in a sense because everything has political implications, but it wasn't political in the sense that I couldn't really tell whether someone was left of center or right of center, and it didn't even really occur to me to think about that. I could put all that to the side and say, hey, we're all sharing in a kind of cultural experience. We do have some commonalities in that I think most of us at the festival, we do believe that there is a role for religion in public life, and that I can say this as a Muslim, I want there to be more Christianity, maybe a certain kind of Christianity in public life, and that would be better for all of us. So it encourages me to see Christians following through on that. But that's not like a left, it doesn't have to be a left or right thing. Others?
I'll just jump in on that. The particular Cardus vision, if you will, comes from a particular view of, all of life is religion. There is no such thing as neutral. So there isn't a sense of, and if you're not jumping on, want more religion. Our argument is we all have religion all the time. We just don't acknowledge it. And being much more explicit about our priors.
Can you just for the audience explain a little bit more what you mean by that? Just for those listening, so that's not misinterpreted.
Well, there is a sense in which, you peel back the onion far enough, and we all start with a core belief that, even if that belief is that reason is the ultimate determiner of all things, at the core of it, you may say, well, that's reasonable, that's a circular sort of thing. There is a belief statement that is at the beginning. Now, many people have non-transcendent beliefs, and there are those who have transcendent beliefs, but belief drives our behavior. In every aspect of life, and organizations as well are there, and are based around a certain set of assumptions and beliefs. In many ways, they're historically taken for granted, and the founding of America was very much founded by a Christian vocabulary and a set of beliefs, even when they weren't talked about. That established sort of a Western as opposed to an Eastern or a different. But we are all religious in the sense that we bring a core set of beliefs that we live out in every aspect of our life, also our public and organizational life.
Right.
Or we'd say like we're all made to worship. It's just a question of what we worship. But there's something in the human spirit that desires something that is beyond. And it's just a question of how that makes itself apparent. And there was the Bob Dylan song, you got to serve somebody. It's just a question of how you make that choice. And I think for secular or non-religious folks, it's really important for them to come into the public sphere and acknowledge that they too are driven by powerful beliefs. As you said, there is no neutrality, but I think there's for a long time in American society, there's been, I think, liberal and secular elites who pretend that they're neutral or aspire to be neutral, but they're actually not. And the sooner we all realize that we're driven by some kind of foundational belief, that means we can have a better dialogue with each other because we're not hiding what our beliefs are. We're being very open about what drives us.
I remember an interview years ago with Madeleine Albright after she had finished her time as Secretary of State. And she said, my formation early on as a diplomat was all about avoiding religion and almost expunging it from any possibility that would come up in conversation until, she said, I had a theophany where it became clear that in fact I couldn't possibly do my job if I didn't bring religion and certainly overt values, spiritual and otherwise, into the direct conversation. Otherwise, it was like we were shadowboxing and we were having all these diplomatic exchanges, but it didn't really tap into the understory of where people actually live out of and what it is that's actually shaping why we're having the particular conversation that we may be having. What would you say as a Brit in particular, as somebody who sees this...
not that you have any problems.
Yes.
We're fine. I think it's what Shadi said, that the phrase that's been running through my mind is moral ambition, and how hard that is to have, actually. And there's various kind of secular discourses around moral ambition, and the effective altruist movement, and various others. It's not that these questions aren't being asked, but the difference, I think, between I forgot the name of the very first woman who spoke. About the mantle, Anika. Yeah, the power of her call, the power of saying, our country has been moving towards justice, and the mantle's been dropped, but it's there to pick it up, right? And this is for all of us. That agency building call. One, I think it's more American than British. We also can do, is one of the things I really like about being here, is people are much more like, Tiffany embodies this, but much more likely to be like, yeah, why not? Let's try it. Rather than, someone's tried that, don't be ridiculous. We've got too much history of failure behind us in the UK. But that call to yes, and it's yes, the brokenness, yes, the brutality, yes, the pain, yes, the division, and yes to creativity and agency and innovation and possibility and hope. And I find it really difficult to be just with the hope people. That's where I roll my eyes, right? The sort of toxic positivity people. And it's really hard to be with the people who are just critiquing, right? Who just point to the problems of the world, who just see what's wrong with the world. And to be in a space where we can actually honor both feels like, oh gosh, we might actually be able to move forward.
Yes.
Can I speak about this from a creative process? I think one thing that, and I might get a little emotional saying this, but one thing that was very beautiful for me to experience, having spent a year and a half making a billion decisions around every little fractal piece of quite a complex, I've used this word four-dimensional because it was entering into time and space. Also ahead of the future and trying to discern the times and the vibe shifts and, it's just a billion elements, and then you get into the concrete space of it. And I think so much of this creation came out of pain, of feeling torn loves that do not get along. In my case, I can describe it in a few different ways. I'll speak a little theologically and experientially. The Reinhold Niebuhr in me and the Henry Nouwen. The love of the Martin Luther King Jr. and the Gandhis and those and then totally convinced and convicted that like we're not in that era of a one leader anymore, and it has to be a we. Partly because of just how complex and globalized we've become as a society. You know, it's no longer binaries of. I mean, there are still binaries, and I kind of tried to present them at the festival in terms of what things America does need to reckon with in a binary sense, of course, racially in particular, and that has spiritual roots and original sin issues and all that civically. I have always been one, I have a love-hate relationship with institutions. I'm so grateful to an organization for whom this was like a big stretch and chose to trust me with something wild and raw. And, you know, I have so much affection for this Dutch Reformed publisher of comment from Canada who is like, I think, has such spiritual flourishing as a fruit of his roots and structure and way of seeing, and that said, yes, and America needs some help, and like, let's just go for it, you know? And there's like a wonderful also like naivete in that we both have, you know, it's not just the two of us, but I'm just, so I think like the desire to see if it was possible to bring soul and structure, of course, left, right, some working class, elite, like all those things, but that have been a part of the pain of trying to bridge these things in my own vocational discernment over the years, and worlds that I see great good in. That it's like, it drives me nuts that a liberation theologian, he actually spoke at the end today, who's also been working his whole life with undocumented immigrants with spinal cord injuries in Houston, that he would not be heard by a beautiful, you know, very conservative, that he wouldn't be heard necessarily, I don't want to say Dutch Reform, but he wouldn't be heard by those that have a wonderful theology in their own right, but would be much more to the right, and would hear language and the sort of liberation theologians mentioned as anathema. But actually the lives being lived, as I see them, are so similar. Love of neighbor, walking with the suffering. Yes, you might have different ideas. Should something be funded more by government or not? Like, but all of that is like so not existential. That's just like practical problem solving. We can have these debates. We've been having them for too long. They're very boring, but they're important. Like it's, and I think because I think we all feel this way. You just have to be honest about it. Like, this is good and this is good, and our world has somehow made them seem like enemies, and they've taught us they are enemies. And certainly in the fabric of the world, and I think Christianity has helped give me this sense of, what if we could shift the frame? And I do not know how to do that didactically. There would be so many people who are here who would be so gifted, and I look, you know, doing that didactically and providing plausibility structures in a way that speaks to the more structural mind. But I did know that somehow a metaphor, when you don't fully have the answer, but you're intuiting your way to something prismatic, maybe we're in such a chaotic, dispersed state, maybe there's something about like an underused metaphor that could help open a doorway where we discover together, because we actually all resonate with something cracking above us. We all feel victims of something.
Yes, right.
And yeah, I don't know if that's quite making sense,
No,
but it was really beautiful to experience, like, okay, maybe it is possible to combine these spheres of life that, as Elizabeth was saying earlier, so segment us, and ways of knowing. Ways of knowing is kind of the secret sauce.
Right, it is, ways of knowing.
Yeah.
And I don't think, you know, you express, you know, some helplessness in terms of how do we didactically carry it forward, and that. I don't think we need to have those answers either.
Yeah.
To some extent, you know, even from a Cardus perspective, you know, our belief is in civil society, it's in partnership. There were 1,000 people in the room, but I don't remember I think the last spreadsheet I saw, there were 269 organizations or something that had leadership attending here. You know, if we're going to use the metaphors, and we've been of horticulture along the way, and we started that a few years ago with Breaking Ground, and now we have the Understory and everything else. The next one may logically be planting seeds or growing shoots, and we think of farmers and we think of nice, neat rows. But it was pretty windy outside there today. Some of the seed is going to grow blow all over the place, and we're not even going to really realize the fruit of it until somebody comes and picks it and brings it to our attention and say, this started at the Understory. And you know, I'm a Dutch Reformed guy. I believe in providence and how God's sovereignty works, all of that. And to some extent, that is even, and I think to get at Anne's point in terms of the differences of all of these, we make our identity a starting point, something other than the fellow humanity.
Yes.
I think Luke Brotherton in his speech, he talked about this expressing itself in 5 different ways.
Yes.
And what struck me, and I don't know, I didn't listen carefully enough to remember if he meant these in these order, but I actually thought the order was important. He started with the need of the neighbor. So often our Christian love for our neighbor, frankly, sees someone else in need, and you step in and help because of that need. And that's a fundamental human response. I trip on the street, and the total stranger is going to come and help me. They're going to see me because I'm a fellow human being.
Yes.
Then, so there is, he started with the need, then he sort of started with the institutions, then government, then aesthetics, and at the end he put the scholarly in. So he has sort of 5 levels of engagement, suggesting we needed them all. But I think the problem is we have, in many ways, inverted the order. As I was listening, I thought, how much is it that we invert the order? We don't start with need or whatever. We start with conservative or liberal. We start with Dutch Reformed or Pentecostal or whatever. No, we in many ways start with the fundamental humanity. God's story has 4 chapters. It starts with creation, and God created all men. And I made mention in my own talk here as a Canadian. I want to be very careful in terms of being in the United States. We don't necessarily appreciate when other governments tell Canadians what to do, and I want to honor that in reverse. But your own constitution, we hold these truths self-evident that all men are created equal. Number one, you didn't discover it; it's self-evident. You didn't invent it. And secondly, all men. That doesn't sound American to me. When we start with that premise, and then we create something building on that rather than one of those other categories. And in many ways, I think that starts with just observing my own suffering, going back to your point about beauty, my own suffering, my own need, my own loneliness, I'm created with a hole in my heart that can only be filled by God. Augustine, I have no rest until I find my rest in you. And when I find that and I share that with others, well, all of a sudden that starts to give expression in my family, in my neighborhood, in my business, and in my politics.
Yes.
I do think there was something of a call to arms that is a little bit more distinctive that people can kind of take with them, and that's in this idea of Christian humanism.
Thank you, Shadi. Thank you.
Maybe you want to say more about that in a moment, but that's what I'll be. I mean, I haven't thought a lot about those 2 words put together, but now it's sort of entrenched in my mind. And what that looks like in practice, I think, will be up to all of us who kind of leave the understory and go in do our own work and participate in our communities in the way that we will. But I think there is I think this idea that for the full human for humans to fully flourish, there has to be some kind of divine constraint or divine inspiration, and that goes to what you were saying, Ray. That the other part of the Declaration is that our rights are endowed by our Creator. They don't come from governments, because if they do come from governments can then take them away.
Right.
But if they come from God, that means that they have a deeper foundation, and that means that those rights can be more secure. So I think adding Christianity to humanism or supplementing humanism in that way is a very powerful idea. Because humanism on its own, I think, can be very me-centered.
Yes.
It sees humans as the ultimate source of creativity and progress. But we, as members of the Abrahamic faith, we say that the human isn't central. Ultimately, God is central. And then we derive something from that centrality that actually allows us to flourish more fully as human beings.
Preach it, my
well
Muslim
said.
brother.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I do think that the role of Christian humanism in the festival was very prominent. Obviously, it was, in a way, it was the content theme throughout the whole time. And I think the experience of it, again, created windows and opportunities to move into spaces and consider ideas and relationships, especially, which are so frequently bounded, which this festival gave an opportunity for freedom. So if the outcome of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution are in part meant to be guarantees of freedom and legitimacy of freedom as a human experience. I think part of what drew people to this was that it felt as though the invitation to an understanding of reality, centered in God, centered in Jesus Christ, centered in the reality of other faiths in the same tradition, and of the experiences of what it means to be a person in the world in all of the places that we live and work and create and make and do all the things that we do, is really, again, back to the word capacious, is really a capacious invitation. But it's a vibrant, healthy freedom, not an indulgent, narcissistic, individual-centric or object-centric, but relational centrism, which was really a part of why it had to be an experience, not a schedule. It was come into this experience, this communion together, which was being created from many different parts that would never otherwise have been together, except for what has occurred in these days. I know that each of us are hosts of podcasts that Comment sponsors, and we're all extremely grateful for the partnership together. And I do wonder about what kind of voice or what kind of hearing do you want to have your listeners experience that ties in with some of the themes we've just been talking about in this conference? I think the instincts actually that we hold in common are these instincts that we've just been talking about, but ground that a bit more in the distinctive angle that your podcast may be. Elizabeth, why don't you lead?
Yeah, well, I just think a lot of these things are kind of sensibility words or character words. The Sacred, which I host, which is really about trying to model real kind of curious conversations with people from a wild range of perspectives and philosophies and life experiences. Ask them about their deep values, right? Not about their controversial ideas, but about what has formed them and their philosophy of life, essentially. Right. And we're trying to do that in a way that is fundamentally hospitable. And that's something that's been really deep in the festival, the setting the table, the centrality of the table, right? The centrality of these ritual meals in our wisdom traditions are there for a reason. And the invitation of the other to come in and be a guest, not an enemy, right? For us to approach them with curiosity and openness because we are committed to their human dignity. That's a central thing that all humanism should share. And Christian humanism grounds in the image of God in us, right? And in the incarnation, in the God coming close as a human. If I believe that, then any human I meet, no matter how different from me or no matter how much deeply I disagree with them, is I'm called to love them. Whether I see them as a neighbor or an enemy, I'm still commanded to love them. Listening to them is one of the sort of simplest and most powerful ways that we can demonstrate love to each other. So those postures of hospitality and openness to the other have been shot through, and we hope that we can continue to model those on the Sacred.
Wow. Shadi, what would you say?
Yeah, so in our podcast, Zealots at the Gate, what we try to do is model a kind of Muslim Christian or Muslim evangelical conversation that can be uncomfortable at times, and we push each other. My co-host is Matthew Kamink, who is of the Calvinist tradition, but he's also conservative. I'm more left of center. We have obviously fundamental theological differences. I think he wants to convert me to Christianity, which is understandable. He's an evangelical, right? That's what he
would be a good Christian.
Exactly. And that's what he's told me. And at first I was very uncomfortable. I'm like, shouldn't you be able to accept me as I am? But he's like, Shadi, no. If you're a dear friend of mine and I have something that I think is valuable, of course I want to be able to share it with you. And he was like, I'm almost offended that you don't want to convert me to Islam. Like that would be the kind of equivalent thing. That's a longer story. But
tune in.
But and we've had fascinating conversations where we pushed each other on, do we as Muslims and Christians believe in the same God? And that was I always assumed that we do believe in the same God. Matthew pushed me on that and shared some of his concerns with that framing. And we can do that and have those uncomfortable conversations, but stay dear friends. And that's what we try to model in our own relationship. And we try to use our collaboration and our friendship to kind of talk about those challenging issues, oftentimes with a political bent, that faith does have something to say about politics and public life. And finding what that kind of intersection is important, because I think a lot of Americans in particular they struggle to bring their religious selves into the public sphere.
Yes.
They're oftentimes told to not bring
Yes.
so much of their religiosity when they're debating politics, that everyone
Yes.
has to be reasonable and secular.
Yes.
But we think it's very important to come to our public lives with strong conviction.
Right, right. I think in being the host of Conversing, one of the things that has struck me is I have lived a privileged life in thousands of different ways, and one of them is the richness of knowing many, many people who are extremely different from one another and feeling an intense connectedness to them. So I kept thinking, how do I invite others into this kind of experience? I can't make everyone a friend of everyone, but I can at least give people an opportunity to have a hearing, a tasting, when they may not have yet stepped across lines of difference, which I've, by God's grace, been able to do in many ways, not yet able to do in all the ways that I would hope. And so the opportunity for these conversations has felt like, please come into this space with an eclectic gathering of people who are guests, who are doing thoughtful, significant work, many out of the motivation of Christian faith and the framing of their understanding of what it means to be a Christian in that space that they particularly occupy, but also being aware that these have kind of overtones that carry across different episodes and that end up inadvertently bringing each other into conversation across lines that are not necessarily in the program, but are part of the residue of the conversation. And so I think it's that creation of a kind of surprising conversation that all of our podcasts land in the ears and hearts and lives of people who find us or we find them in some wholly unexpected way. I'm wondering, Ray, how are you feeling? How would you describe the contribution of?
Yeah, so the podcast that I'm going to host,
Yes.
The first edition is scheduled to land in September.
Nice.
Is with my colleague Andrea Senya. And it really comes out of, frankly, the inspiration of your collective podcasts along the way, and the fact that Cardus is establishing a family of podcasts. We felt there was a missing piece in terms of, number one, our Canadian identity as a think tank and a number of the issues that are there. Andrea and I are not quite like Shadi and Matt, but she's of a different generation than I am. She's Roman Catholic, I'm Dutch Reformed. She's an immigrant to this country, from an Eastern country in her early teens, experiences the country from quite a different lens, and yet she's the director of policy at Cardus, and I'm the co-founder. So we find ourselves collaborating, and frankly, we found ourselves at the water cooler having lots of interesting conversations that our colleagues seem to enjoy listening into, and the suggestion was that maybe we should broaden the audience for that. I would just highlight, it is interesting, I know Canada is not necessarily on the front of mind for most Americans along the way, but I think there are some interesting questions we're facing in Canada as well. Number one, we were formed very much as an explicit pluralism. Canada in 1867 is many ways a peace treaty between French Catholics and English Protestants who weren't particularly getting along. Read the previous 100 or so years, or actually go all the way back to the Battle of the Plains of Abraham. So that is a story of conflict, frankly, from 1763 to 1867. I don't mean any offense to my gracious hosts in the United States, but I am heading back to Canada tonight, so I'll dare say that. But frankly, it was American expansionism and the threats of annexation in Canada in the 1860s that caused Canadians at that time to look and basically say, well, the French Catholics and English Protestants sort of hate each other and we're fighting, but we'd rather live together in some sort of arrangement than become American at the time. So there is an element of anti-Americanism that's actually built into that. On the same side, we have become, the strongest trading relationship and the strongest undefended border in the world, and whatever the challenges of recent years may be, geography has made us neighbors, and we will forever be neighbors. And the vibes, the cultural, the political vibes that cross the borders that are there. Now, Canada's facing, or we're going to have our province of Alberta is going to have a separation referendum on October the 19th. Quebec is going to elect a government where, if the current polls hold true, there's going to be another separatist government. We may have another separation. So we have great internal challenges, and they're our fault. They're not your fault in any stretch of the imagination. But there is, the questions of a European mindset to some extent, French laïcité, French notions of secularism, how that all intersects. I think there are a lot of things that not just Canadian listeners, but American listeners will find of interest. And we have similar to you, Mark, I'm blessed. I've been the co-founder of a think tank that now has some prominence in Canada. We have lots of connections along the way in terms of guests, and we have lots of resources within Cardus. I started a weekly newsletter during the pandemic that has grown to several thousand, that has a fairly elite leadership, and so in many ways we're seeking to just extend that Cardus Insights to the next level with this podcast.
Very exciting. And let's give you the final word on the podcast and how you see your own.
Yeah, so the podcast that I lead or host is called The Whole Person Revolution, and it has been on a bit of hiatus in trying to birth this festival, but I hope to come back to it this late summer and September and relaunch in a sense. It has always been animated. It was begun over COVID in the context of this other project Comment started called Breaking Ground, and it has, a little picking up on what Elizabeth has said and what I've said previously, it's been animated by how do you talk to doers on the ground about the soul of their organizations. It's not 1,000% institutional. I had the most incredible interview with Elizabeth a couple years ago about kind of like apocalypse, and so what has historically been is Comment does themes every quarter. Those are discerned, like it's like a discerning of the times, like trying to get the timing right. Is this the time to focus on friendship? Is this the time to focus on declensionist theories? Is this the time to focus on control and lack of control? Our themes are like pre-political, like more climate than weather. And so that, for me at least, has been an organizing frame for a season that this may change in the future, but historically it's been like a season of 8 episodes with this stained glass window that we have tried to create in prose and in art in the magazine. And then because my heart, I learned bottom up, that's just how I'm wired, my heart is always like with the practitioners out there. So it's like we have this cerebral thing going on in the pages. And then, but to me, it's not valuable. It's wonderful if academics and intellectuals read us, but I just get so much joy when it's like it feels like the power of naming and power of moral imagination sort of fuels those and actually can play a cohering function and a community building function for those who are standing up to ICE in Minneapolis in January. And vocabulary still matters as much as language feels a little like brittle these days. So I think part of the podcast is the chance to feature the people and the voices that are embodying something of what we're celebrating and exploring and or feeling consternation about in our pages. And that they're both to expand the audience, so we are reaching both thinkers and doers, but that there can be some synthesis between the realm of imagination and those actually living it, because I tend to think we're in a time when the practice is way ahead of the theory when it comes to the good. So the podcast is just a nice colloquial form to tease out voices who would never feel comfortable writing an essay.
So I do think that we all feel a responsibility going from this experience to manifest it in its fruitfulness and in its ongoing questions and uncertainties. I'm just wondering, where do you feel a call to give attention, nurture, support, encourage in your own particular context?
I have a particular interest in both community and the sense of neighborhoods and neighboring, but also living in community, living up close with other people as a kind of key social and spiritual technology for our times. And I have people in my household that would love us to be being more ambitious and more innovative about the call to make that possible for others. And so I'm going away with a little bit more energy to step up on that.
Nice.
Now, I'm a think tank guy, but I understand that politics, as I mentioned earlier, is downstream from culture. My own role at particular stage of Cardus's life is, I'm very much responsible for formation and thinking about how do we pass on an institution to a next generation of leaders in a way that holds on to our roots, but also adapts to the environment in which it's going to be. It's not, I think, if a founder thinks that you can somehow control what it's going to be 30 years from now and anticipate, then that's a big mistake.
Sorry.
It's not gonna, some days it's a challenge controlling it while you are still in the position. That said, when I think of formation and I apply it to the metaphor that we've been using in terms of growth and all of the rest, there is every plant has its own shape, its own flavor, its own scent, its own way of growing. But there is a certain amount of pruning, there is a certain amount of steering you can put, and in many ways at Cardus, and whether that's through comment in terms of providing resources to other leaders, we're a wholesaler, we're not a retailer, we're not trying to influence the masses. We are trying to be a tool of resource for leaders in the many organizations at all levels. And just interpreting the times, really what do we have? We have three things. We collect data and provide information. We can create a vocabulary or narrative within which you can find yourself. And we can create platforms, convening spaces. One of the things that Cardus does for every one of our events, and we do about 50 or so events a year, but has been on steroids here over the last few days at this, is the fact of what we call the unlikely room. Our aspiration for every Cardus event is that you will meet a person that you've never been in the same room with before and create that opportunity for engagement. So we see ourselves as a convener of platforms to bring other people together to produce things that we may never know about, but in God's grace and providence will grow.
It's a great vision. Shadi?
I don't know exactly what it will look like going back out into the world. I'll be a little bit sad, I think, for the rest of the day.
Sorry.
After seeing so many great friends, some of whom I hadn't seen in a long time. But I think that I'm re-energized, and I think I'm reminded. As a writer, I think I spend a lot of time alone. I ultimately end up being a little bit too me-centered and too isolated. So just to be reminded that I'm part of a larger community with my Christian brothers and sisters, that to me is just something I need at least a couple times a year. And I think I got a very good dose of it at the Understory. So I'm grateful for that.
Right.
Thanks for coming, Shadi, and trusting us.
Yeah.
Totally.
I think for me, I think it's partly that I've always felt like I was a discoverer. I like going to places, being in settings I don't know, being with unfamiliar people whose worlds are vastly different than my own. All that is a very drawing influence. And I think part of what this has stimulated is understanding certain pockets of local opportunity for discovery that I haven't yet pursued, that I've thought of several times over the course of these days, thinking that's a person, or that's a place, or that's an institution that's nearby where I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, where I don't see that clearly. And I want to hear the voices, I want to understand what that reality is, which is undoubtedly different than the realities that I'm thinking of, are very different from the realities that I live. And I need and want to understand that, and then I want that to be shared. So I think part of that is in mind, but it's also, how could I do a better job connecting these people? Because again, there's a kind of connection that happens through the podcast, but there's plenty of opportunity for small gatherings and events that don't involve cathedrals and other such things, to be able to experience in a localized setting that I feel motivated to want to do more. And Anne?
I have two things that come to mind, and they're vocation specific to this thing that I get to steward, Comment Magazine, and this podcast network and different media we find ourselves growing into, is it was really special, and I always knew this could be true. It was very special to have a form of legibility, a form that was not the written word only. There was written word, of course, behind speeches, and we had calligraphy. There's a lot of written words. But insofar as this really was a 3D space, the historic, symbolic, etc., that is in a paradoxical relationship with the understory. I talked about this overstory versus understory.
Right.
it was so satisfying for me and it was part of the mischief and the delight that kept me going in planning the program, was like, this 3D form allows for a wider array of people who have such wisdom to offer from the street, from musical tradition, from oration, from rhetoric, that I have just longed for a much more global cultural experience of comment that is comment's heart, but the written word tends to attract, frankly, people who look like me. And it's just, I mean, there's a deep history to this, Western kind of the written word, and the written word is amazing. The word made flesh, but I think this has often felt like we've been blocked from accessing, from like showing our heart of welcome to get all these very important voices and perspectives in our pages, and it felt just like the key got unlocked through a different medium that now I feel like, I feel like we have like such a richer pipeline of writers that now know, and like we are all in and we want, so there's that I'm excited about, seeing that like kind of right away. And then second thing is, I cannot think about, in terms of an event, I can't think about that for a while, of another one of these or anything like that. But if there is going to be some continuation in a formal institutionally sponsored sense that involves planning and programming and all curation, et cetera, I just think there's so much uncovered richness in all the different traditions, cultural and theological, and also non-theological, political traditions, where I just feel like Thomas Halleck, who opened the night to us in a recorded video from Prague, he didn't say it in the address he gave to us, but I've heard him say he thinks of all the binaries in our time, of the world, of all the divides, the real one that he thinks is the most troubling, or at least the most true, is we are somehow divided between the surface and the depths. And especially living in Washington, like Shadi does, which is full of brilliant people, too many PhDs, it's full of people who can get really textured and nuanced in their lane. But I feel like, especially with religious traditions, but there is a heritage underneath such a wide world. Like, think of a global world of people and communities that have like deep, articulate, liturgical, rhythmic, aesthetic projects, theological, aesthetic, civic, political, and like virtue formation, character formation projects that look different in different cultural emphases, that are almost infinite in how far back they go. And I think both the richness of them as traditions and the sort of length of history, I'm just excited to explore that. I was very intentional to choose like the most celebrated Black preacher in America today to end our time. However, I talked to some beautiful Eastern Orthodox guys that, like, in a future time, I would love to see a little bit more of the Eastern Orthodox Catholic traditions brought in. Or, who would Shadi recommend from some of his worlds? And I think those who can be articulate about the hymnodies and like all these different embodied practices we have this thing at Cardus where I feel like we think, or we try to embody this thing that's so unpopular when we talk about pluralism, which is it is actually possible to have deep roots and wide open arms. And Elizabeth's whole life embodies this. And I think it's at the heart of her vocation of like saying yes to both, yes and I just am excited to showcase that you can be very hospitable and porous, and in fact the deeper your roots go, the wider your canopy can be. And I think just getting into the texture of that, at least for me, the nerdy part of me gets really excited to just sort of show what's underneath the ground.
Amen.
Because we're really like focused on these, I'm just really tired of like 5 big debates that, the root system is so much bigger. It's just been a little bit buried under a lot of moss.
So I think one of the things that anybody that might be listening to this podcast is going to feel is how much they might have wished to be here. We're not trying to create a FOMO moment of intense fears that you had really missed out on something. You did, by the way, but since you have, or if you did, we just want to invite you to the landscape of our podcast, but really also obviously into Comment Magazine. And even out of this experience in the Understory Festival, there will be assets, production that will come forth and be posted in ways that you can find and taste and see for yourself some of what it is that we've experienced here. But I just want to say that there are many associations that all of us have, and one of the associations that makes this one so special in particular is really the singular person. That's one part of it, without individualism, like the authenticity of a singular human life. That is one of the most astonishing miracles in the world to me as a person. And I think all of us have a taste for wanting to live and dwell and reflect on that stunning reality. And then we live in community. Of course, we must. Healthy, unhealthy, vibrant, not so vibrant, localized. And everything that we've been talking about is not at the meta level. It's really at the most granular level that it actually lives and has its being, hence Understory. It's really in that organic exchange. And I think even the joy of being able to be in one another's presence when we live in different places and we have never been a group of 5 sitting together in a room doing anything together. But in this moment, the taste of that reality, which is really part of what we're trying to stimulate and encourage both in the podcast that we do, in the writings of comment, and in the festival, but also in what we're really inviting a much wider group of people to enter into and be conscious of entering into, and even leading in local settings that anybody is in, and to share in the miracle of human existence in a world that is as fraught as the one that we have, that is as groaning as the world that we live in, and is also full of the hope of a God who shares and embodies and holds all of that in God's own being, and with hope and love and assurance that we are seen and heard and known. Thank you very much for being part of this conversation today. And we just we're all exhausted, but Anne, you get special exhaustion credits. And we want to invite everyone into rest, but also into the work and ongoing favor and labor of Christian humanism and of the Understory that we all contribute to and receive from. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Conversing is produced and distributed in partnership with Comment Magazine and Fuller Seminary. Peter Labberton is our engineer and editor. Evan Rosa is our producer. For more information about Comment Magazine, visit comment.org, where you can subscribe, read the current magazine issue, and browse their archive. Fuller Seminary is an evangelical, multi-denominational graduate institution committed to providing indispensable formational education for diverse Christian leaders everywhere. For information, visit fuller.edu. I'm your host, Mark Labberton. Thanks for listening with me.